Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. This episode is brought to you by Highlander USA. Highlander USA is the adventure of a lifetime. It is a hiking event held in Big Bear, California, June 17th through 21st, with formats from 1 day to 5 days. If you are interested in hiking or backpacking and being around those who love the outdoors, look no further than Highlander. Use code KENZIE20 for 20% off your registration. I hope to see you there. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Mason Daniels. He is a follower of Jesus, Arizona-based nomad, and a Forerunner full-timer. He's a U.S. Coast Guard veteran and a longtime outdoor professional, serving with the National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Land Management throughout the western states, Alaska, and Hawaii. The outdoors has always been a huge part of his life, and he's into adventure travel, drone cinematography, fishing, paddling, camping, and volunteering as a Sherpa to help folks with disabilities get out on the trail. His interests include health and fitness, homesteading and community sufficiency, geospatial technology, and Sasquatch. He's no stranger to valleys or victories, and that's why he's here. Thanks so much for being with us today, Mason.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kenzie. Glad we could finally connect.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I just read your bio, but why don't you go ahead and just share with the listeners a little bit more about yourself and who you are?
Oh, man. Yeah, just some guy out here living. A little more background. I'm from Appalachia originally. That's where I came into the world. Left when I was 18. Hit the road. A little combination of my father's blood coursing through my veins and kind of a lack of opportunity to get out and travel the way I really wanted to as a kid. Really just kind of fueled this insatiable curiosity about the world, you know. And so, yeah, I just kind of busted out of the barn and didn't look back, you know. When I left the service, I obviously went into public land management for all the big federal agencies there, doing, you know, trails, working as a sawyer, a lot of maintenance stuff, a lot of very unsexy, you know, blasting toilets in Moab, that kind of thing. Invasive species management, equipment operator, wildland fire fuel management, that kind of stuff. So, spent a lot of time outdoors, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you get into some of that stuff? Was the outdoors something that you've always had a passion for, or what kind of started that journey into the kind of working for the government and the outdoors?
Yeah, the way we grew up, we were out in the county, out in the holler, you know. So my brother and I running around the woods, and we didn't really have any friends nearby. It wasn't like suburbia, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of time alone in the woods, acting like a dinosaur, you know what I'm saying? Throwing sticks and rocks and whatnot. You know, very thankful to be part of the generation that was very much on the cusp of, you know, still living an old-fashioned life and still being tech competent, you know. But yeah, so grew up running around in the woods, and I originally thought I was going to make a career in the military, but got sick of shaving my face and shining my boots, and just realized it really wasn't the fit for me long term. And actually cut my teeth first, training for wildland fire in Colorado through an organization called Veterans Fire Corps. And so did some fuel reduction work out there, got some experience as a sawyer, and got the bug, you know. Not long after that, I got my first real gig with the Forest Service as an OHV ranger in southern Utah. And man, it's just been it's been a wild ride ever since. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something that I've always thought about doing, like, oh, that'd be fun to go work for the trail service or, the Forest Service or a national park or something like that. Anytime you can combine your job and your passions, I think that's definitely really cool. So you said you've kind of worked in all of the Western states and Alaska and Hawaii. Which one were you the most sad to leave?
Oh, man. That's a tough question, man. Each of those has their own merits, trying to choose a favorite place is impossible. It's like picking your favorite food, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think Alaska, specifically Glacier Bay, was, I think, the hardest to leave. Don't get me wrong, when it starts raining sideways, the shoulder season kicks in, you're in the temperate rainforest, you know about that life. Yeah. Yeah. You get to looking for some sunshine, But, I think the sense of community that you develop living off the road system there in a park, in a community like that, at least my first season up there, I think 2015, it's like 400 year-round permanent residents in East Davis, the port of town for Glacier Bay. And there was also a time where, we didn't have Wi-Fi in the bunkhouses, and we didn't have cell service. If you want to make a phone call, man, you got to hop on a bike and pedal 9-10 miles into town at the ferry dock to get a couple bars of service, So that being said, it was interesting going back in 2020 in a slightly different capacity and realizing how much things had changed. The connectivity has its virtues, of course, but ultimately, maybe a little homesick for a place that doesn't exist anymore in time. So the hardest to leave, yeah, Glacier Bay, I'd say.
It's a place I've been to Alaska and worked seasonally there, but not Glacier Bay. So it is on the list, and definitely am interested in going to all of the national parks up in Alaska because they all seem to be wildly kind of remote and just, wild in the most most basic sense. So kind of outside of, the jobs, kind of talk to us about what you like to do in the outdoors without, the titles of the jobs.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, these days, my outdoor recreation tends to be, I would say, objective driven. Honestly, I'm not the kind of guy that likes to go hiking just to hike. You know what I'm saying? I think you spend enough time with the trail crew, and some guys are just built for that. I don't know. And I always enjoyed working as a sawyer, but some guys just can't get enough of the trail. But I'm good, man. Unless I have, a honey hole fishing I'm trying to get to, or it's an objective. It's it's a fish to catch. It's a feature on the map. It's something to film. So right now, my favorite thing to do is aerial cinematography, doing drone work, things like that. And sometimes the objective is just to get as far away from people as I can, and I freaking love people. I love people. I really do. But being a true ambivert, man, that time to disconnect and recharge is critical, and especially working in super high volume parks like Olympic, for example, it really burns you out on crowds. And so I really just try to get out there in my truck and punch out as far as I can. And I'm going to be the only soul around, just me and the skinwalkers out there.
Yeah, you added in your bio that you're really interested in Sasquatch, and so I'm just curious. Have you found him yet?
Oh man, well, it's debatable. That's a conversation for another time, maybe. But I haven't. I've had some strange experiences out there. I will say that, specifically in the Pacific Northwest on the Olympic Peninsula. And although I have not personally had a sighting, I do have more than one friend in Alaska and the Northwest that supposedly has. So we'll leave it at that. Yeah. I'm just saying, right. It's a phenomenon, man.
So there might be more than one, is what you're saying.
Oh, for sure. Sasquatch is plural, no doubt. Yeah, about it. Yeah. Yeah. No, I for real, plural. Oh man, I'm very interested in this topic. I mean, since I was a kid, I was fascinated with cryptozoology. Yeah, just
Yeah,
of all the critters out there, Sasquatch takes the cake.
I love it. I love it. And I love that you said that, you like going out with an objective. And so, is it a fish to catch? Is it a certain site you want to see, that sort of thing? Not just necessarily you go to see something. And I think that's interesting. I think that that's a really fun way to do it. And it always has you probably learning and researching different things about different places versus just like going to go. And so I love it.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt.
So I know that you live on the road kind of right now full time. Is this something that you see yourself doing for a while? Is it just a temporary season of life, or are we sold on the nomadic lifestyle?
Oh man, no, it's expeditious right now. I think I've done this before. You know what I mean? At different times in my life. When I first washed up in Southern Utah, I was living out of my car, that kind of thing, doing the dirt bike thing. Did the camper van thing in Moab a few years ago. And right now, it's just I've had a lot of curveballs and plot twists in the last, specifically, I'd say like 18 months or so. And right now, it's just kind of an indefinite state of being while like praying and seeking direction for the next chapter. But I mean, ultimately, I don't. I definitely want to anchor in somewhere, and I'm kind of been like shopping for that place in that situation for a while now. But I have enough up in the air with continuing education and professional stuff that I thought maybe I ought to give it a minute, and also see what happens with this economy, with this new administration and things like that. In a practical sense, I thought let's just hold on for a hot minute, but yeah, man, I would love to have like a little farm, little homestead, something like that, and a more permanent base camp for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say you mentioned that you like the homesteading and community sufficiency, so that probably has to be your dream at some point, but just was curious.
Yeah, but I mean, if the past year or so has taught me today, it's that, you know, I mean, God's plan is literally, it's just, I don't know. There's been a lot of like heartache and disappointment over the past, this couple of years. And I'm not trying to soft sap fiddle here. Like a huge part of that has been self-inflicted wounds. But yeah, I definitely have that desire. But ultimately, I've kind of learned, and what I'm really trying to be conscious of now is seeking His direction to order my steps. Just trying to do the next right thing and keep the windshield clean. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Keep the windshield clean. So, talk to us a little bit about how being in the outdoors and being, on these adventures plays a role specifically in your relationship with Christ.
Oh man, wow. I think the first thing that comes to mind really is it's being outdoors, like really getting out there. I'm not talking about a walk in the park. It could be as simple as a walk in the park, but you know what I'm saying. Really punching out there and giving yourself time to disconnect and acclimate. It's instrumental in bringing about, for me, this appropriate sense of awe and wonder and humility when considering the creator and the architect of this whole thing, this whole wild apparatus. Think about the delicate balance, natural order and play all around you. And yeah, and let's be honest, you get yourself into some sketchy situations and it's pretty good for your prayer life. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, really not joking, you take some calculated risks and you get out there and maybe things get a little hairy. And at least for me, yeah, it really does a number on your prayer life. So, yeah, apart from that, I think that just the serenity and the isolation that's possible in those wildlands, wild spaces, it's a lot easier to disconnect, and it sort of insulates you from distractions, and makes more space to connect than man upstairs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's it's interesting what you said, get out there, get in some sketchy situations, and it'll affect your prayer life. For me, I feel like it resets, and I don't know if this is even possible, but this is the way that I feel. I feel like it resets my nervous system. Like the things that I'm anxious about in everyday life, it's like go out into the wilderness and actually experience like anxiety of like not knowing where you're going to get water or not having enough food, or, you know what I mean? Like having real life stressors. Not to say that, you know, things aren't real life stressors in our real life, but most of the things that we stress about are not life or death. You know what I mean? And they're actually probably not going to happen. Whereas like when you're in an actual situation, it's like, oh, okay, these are the things in life that really matter at the very end of the day. And so I feel like I always come back like more thankful and more calm. And I just like don't get excited about, you know, some of the things that I would before I went out there. So I think that's good that you said, you know, get out there and experience some real fear.
Yeah, man, for sure. It's all about perspective. You know, I love what you said there. I just got to piggyback on that. You know, when it really just comes down to like food, water, shelter, basics of survival, you know, when you plug back into society to whatever extent, it really does reframe your perspective and help you prioritize, for sure. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird though, because not everybody's on the same page as you. And so they're like, what's going on?
Yeah. It's like coming from the Alaska bush and dropping in Seattle when, you know, you haven't driven more than 40 mile an hour for 6 months, you know, and it's like chaos, you know. Good times.
Yeah. I can imagine that was quite the culture shock. So, Mason, can you share a story with us about a way in which God has maybe revealed himself to you or spoken to you through the outdoors?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey there, I'm Bellamy Young. I'm an actor and a producer. I've been working with the global humanitarian organization CARE, and I am so excited to invite you along for my new podcast, She Leads with CARE. Each week, you'll meet some incredible women who have changed their lives and their communities.
We raise our voices for people who don't raise their voices to defend themselves.
Listen to She Leads with CARE now on your favorite podcast platform. New episodes every Tuesday.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, too many to count, really, right? But I think what really comes to mind and what is the most relevant to this conversation would be, I think, my last summer at Glacier Bay was a real crossroads. You know, this was the summer of 2020. A lot was changing in the world at large and my life. And, you know, I had this killer opportunity with the Park Service for a permanent leadership position with the trail crew there. And it sounds like you're familiar, but maybe for those unaware, I mean, you can go, I mean, folks can go 10, 15, upwards of 20 years doing seasonal work and, you know, vying for a permanent position like that, where, you know, you can essentially create your own furlough in the dead of winter too. And, you know, it was just a killer gig, awesome leadership there. And just a really, really special place. And I had been striving and moving that direction for some time, you know. But I felt a little conflict, you know. I felt I had some decisions to make, you know. I had some veterans education benefits that were going to expire in the foreseeable future at that point. And I had some other desires and ambitions that would not be served by a place and situation and a community like that, however wonderful it is, you know. Yeah, so I was really seeking hard direction for the next step, you know, and I had this absolutely just incredible gig on a silver platter right in front of me, but also felt calling in a pull to, oddly enough, go back into the medical field. So in the Coast Guard, I was a corpsman, right, working in health services. So I had a background there, and a familiarity, and getting some other ambitions and desires in life. I thought it was just a practical move to make, you know. But I was very much on the fence and conflicted. But so after a lot of earnest praying and seeking and whatnot, I had this night I had this night in Glacier Bay. It was near the end of the season where I had already, signed up for school and everything, and was on that track, but my spirit was still kind of unsettled, and I needed some sort of like affirmation, and so I just had this night in Glacier Bay near the end of the season. It felt like an absolute gift from God in every way. It was just like all the right conditions. We had clear skies that night, which is an absolute treat in the Southeast and in the temperate rainforest, and best aurora I have ever personally witnessed, primarily green, just like, unbelievable. I've got like a really crappy, coarsely pixelated smartphone picture, but, doesn't do it justice at all, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, we had bioluminescent algae in the surf and on the beach, so waves rolling in and Barber Cove, lapping up against the shore, popping off green, the boot prints from the extra tufts glowing green, and actually had humpbacks in the cove there too, popping off doing pictorial fin slaps, so it's like a freaking cannon going off, yeah. And it was just, sort of an orca beach in itself, and dancing a jig for me, doing some interpretive dance or something. And that was like, I don't know, that felt like the perfect send off for me. It's like God granted this very, very special, collaboration of events, as if to say, here, we're checking this box, brother. Go on, move on. It's time. It's time to disengage and take this next step in faith. So, yeah, that's the one that really comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I love that you said, it was like the perfect send off, because in my mind I was thinking, like a fireworks show is usually the end of something. And this was like God's version of an Alaskan fireworks show. And it's like, okay, this season is over.
Yeah.
It's time to go on. It kind of wrapped a bow on the whole thing. And that's really cool that you got to experience that. And that was also, timed with this internal struggle. And, it was enough to say like, okay, this was the right move. This is my, my final goodbye, so on and so forth. And so I think that's really special. So I know that you try your hardest to stray away from urban environments and big cities. But if there was a listener who is listening, who maybe that's where they live and that's, where they have to be for whatever it is that they do, what are some practical ways that they can start connecting with God through nature on an everyday basis while not being out on these super crazy remote places like you get to be all the time?
Oh, man. Yeah, no. Step number one, get the hell out of the city. No, I think, I think in the most practical and elemental sense, regardless of where you are, you can be in New York, Chicago, whatever, and you can find yourself a little green space. It may not be as glamorous as Glacier or the Everglades or something like that, but you can find yourself a little patch of dirt to put your bare feet in the soil, and you can get some sunlight on your skin and breathe in some fresh air. And I think that's like immediately what comes to mind for a very practical way to connect with creation. And there are very much like we're obviously beginning to understand more and more of this in the scientific realm, and finally get explanations for why it feels so good. And talk about grounding, earthing, ionic exchange, all that, of course. And so that's something that practically anybody can do, regardless of where you are.
Yeah.
But really, though, get the hell out of the city. I think there are limitations there, right? There are limitations there. And so, the opportunity is there like never before. I would say probably like, I don't know, just off the cuff, like outside of, pre-industrial revolution or whatever. Think about our ancestors. There's arguably no better time to get out there, in terms of like transportation, technology, gear. It's so accessible, almost too accessible. You could argue almost too accessible in some cases. But yeah, make it a priority. Get out there. It's a decision, right? Like anything else in life. But if you absolutely can't and you're stuck in the city, I think there's also like an intellectual avenue for connection to God through creation and academic approach. I mean, you can learn about about the beautiful chaos that's going on out there through documentaries, all kinds of literature, whatever, and get to know your creator a little better and have a deeper appreciation for his work in that way, But yeah, you know what? A note on urban places. I don't, contrary to popular belief, I don't hate cities. I like to pop into the city here and there, but I get my fill real quick, But I'll say what's interesting about working in the parks over the years, I had a lot of conservation corps, SCA or whatever, interns, kids, coming from a lot of times urban places back east. And I tell you what, man, some of these kids go on to be really like on fire for conservation, and having the next level of appreciation. It's one thing when you grow up out in the country and, you're used to that kind of thing. But when you grow up in a major metropolis and there's a serious cap on how many freaking stars you can see in the sky at night, and then you go to a place like Glacier or a place like Alaska or Olympic, man, it's revolutionary. It literally busts your paradigm as to what you conceive is possible,
Yeah.
So I'll say, the deprivation of these things oftentimes inspires very fierce appreciation.
We'll be back after a quick break.
What's up, guys? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. Do you ever feel like sermons skip the chapters you're living in?
What?
Like church turned into a TED Talk after a concert? Well, at the Balance of Gray, we ask real questions, wrestle with real doubts, and yeah, we leave room for some laughs along the way.
Ooh.
But make no mistake, prophecies are unfolding, and this isn't dress rehearsal. It's the final act. The gospel isn't a vibe, it's a rescue plan. And lukewarm doesn't cut it. From scientific proof to spiritual warfare, this is where faith is not blind. Search The Balance of Gray wherever you get your podcasts and hit follow now. That's The Balance of Gray podcast. I'll see you soon.
Phenomenon is what it is.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. And I think that can be really true. Some people will never appreciate it, but sometimes not having it for so long can make you really appreciate it. And so, yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny that you said just get the heck out of the city, because that's what my husband literally yesterday, he was like, my favorite answer on this question whenever people say that is just get out. Just get out. And so I know he's already going to love it. Okay, Mason. Well, switching gears a little bit into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory, would love for you to share a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced and just what God maybe taught you or prepared you for in that season.
Oh, man. Yeah. I think probably my biggest valley so far, and this is kind of a perfect segue from, talking about that send-off, the grand finale in Glacier Bay, and wrestling with those two courses. It's crazy, man. You see God's hand in all of it now. It can be a little confusing at the time, as it should be. How else can you build trust without, if you know everything, if everything's so predictable, right? But yeah, so I wound up, I could have done anything, right? But I had this pull to go back into the medical field, and to go into specifically diagnostic imaging and not just diagnostic imaging, but specifically MRI or magnetic resonance imaging, right? And which just happens to be a modality that doesn't use any ionizing radiation whatsoever, right? So there's no serious concern for any physiological effects like with ionizing radiation exposure with CT or X-ray to a lesser degree, right? And so anyway, I didn't even want to move back to Hawaii, honestly, like kind of been there, done that. And I love Arizona. I love the Southwest. But I had this killer job, just following my lap, pretty much right out of school. And it was one of those, it was one of those offers you just can't refuse. You know what I mean? And it's just too good. Really good money and just great situation, awesome crew. And so I took it. And anyway, so I took that gig. I left for Oahu this time around in, what was it, like July of 2022, fresh out of school, you know? And so, man, I remember, you know, it normally took me about an hour to get to work, you know? I was working in Honolulu, kind of Waikiki area, but living up around Lahaina, you know? And, but man, yeah, Friday, August 12th, I'll never forget, dude. There was like no traffic on the road at all. It's kind of eerie, actually, you know, super calm and still, golden sunrise popping up and just beautiful, serene drive. And I got to work in like 43 minutes. I remember how that timed it. But so many of these events in retrospect, you know, conspired to bring all this about. And, you know, I think, you know, I'm not really a believer in coincidence at all. But so that's kind of how it started, you know. So I got into work like 45 minutes early, right? And so one of the patients on the schedule that morning, we were going to do what's called an MRA chest, you know, looking at the heart rate vessels and dynamic study where we, you know, deliver contrast and watch that contrast diffuse through the aorta and all that, right? And that wasn't even a regular exam that we did at that clinic, you know, on the regular. The last patient on file to have that study was the same dude, right? And so given that my coworker and mentor was also new to that facility, we needed to test that whole sequence out because you got one shot to get it right? So we needed to test that out. And so I hopped in the scanner as a test patient. And yeah, I got out and my mentor, local guy, Ed, he's like, oh, bro, huge tumor in my chest, you know, and it's kind of a shock for everyone, as you can imagine. At that point, I'm like, you know, mid-30s, you know, arguably, you know, in my prime, physically doing everything right, man, you know, working out every day, eating all organic, filtering my water, detoxing on a regular, all that kind of stuff, you know. And so it really was a rough wave. And anyway, yeah, so life got kind of wild from that point on. You know, I realized pretty early on that I wanted to be back on the mainland to figure all that out, you know, closer to my support system that was, you know, had deeper roots. And frankly, healthcare in Hawaii is not fantastic, even on Oahu, you know. So, no offense, guys. Just a lot better resources on the mainland for something like that. That's, you know, life or death, you know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, popped back to Tucson and had a biopsy and all these tests and confirmed diagnosis of mediastinal seminoma, which is a relatively rare germ cell tumor. And so, and so, yeah, it was kind of a whirlwind there. I really struggled with this part, like on treatment, you know, wrestling with what to do, you know, because the conventional treatment for that particular type of cancer is chemotherapy. And man, chemo is the last freaking thing I wanted to do, you know, especially after spending so many years being so judicious about what I put into and on my body and all these things, right? And so, however wonderful it may be, there's obviously famous side effects and collateral damage that comes with the course of treatment like that. And so I kind of wrestled with that and deliberated a little bit. You really don't know what you're going to do in a situation like that until, you know, the wolf's at the door and, hey, gut check, man, you know. So anyway, I wrestled with that for some time. I did some sort of alternative treatments and whatnot while I continued to pray for direction on that. And yeah, I wound up getting the affirmation that I needed to proceed with chemo. And man, had a pretty hairy night there in Montana. I was visiting a friend up in Glacier National Park, just right there outside West Glacier, and sleeping on the back porch of the cabin, and that's the first time it really hit me like, dang, dude, we really could have died like pretty quickly from this. I'll spare you all the details, about, the Warburg effect and metabolic effects of sugar and all that, right? But basically, I felt this thing growing inside of me, right? And so this tumor was in the mediastinum, that space between basically your sternum, your breastbone, and your heart, right? And it was growing so rapidly at that point that, goodness, I felt like a freaking water buffalo was sitting on my chest. I couldn't breathe, and I didn't even feel like I had the breath to call 911. You know what I'm saying? And so, talk about something that's good for your prayer life. Just praying through it, breathing through it best I could, but sharp stabbing pains, kind of like through my chest cavity, my back, and I could feel this thing growing and pressing against my heart and lungs. It was pretty wild. But anyway, so yeah, talk about a valley and an unexpected one. You know what I mean? Everything was going so good in my life. You know what I'm saying? Like I, just finished school, got this absolutely killer job offer in quote unquote paradise, and things were firing on all cylinders, and then just wham, out of nowhere, and so it was ultimately 4 cycles of BEP style chemo. So that equates to, about 3 or so months of infusions starting around Christmas time, 2022, and finishing up around March 2023. The effects of chemo, man, that's everything there's so many reasons I didn't want to do chemo, but man, the freaking blood clots, and couldn't blow my nose without gushing blood. Man, lots of other gnarly side effects for sure. It was just kind of a rough time, man. But back to Alaska, I got to flash back to the summer 2020. I was at Fred Meyer in Juneau stocking up on some supplies before, flying over to Glacier Bay. And talk about Providence, man. It's so crystal clear now. Look at that. I was deliberating over what cooking oil I was going to take into the backcountry, avocado, olive, looking at smoke points, you know what I'm saying? And this gal comes up to me in Fred Meyer, and I must have had smoke coming out of my ears, man. I looked pretty confused because she asked if she could help me. It turns out she's a personal, wellness coach and a health consultant, dietary consultant, things like that. And she winds up being the one who puts me on to Dr. Walter Longo's work. He was an Italian biochem PhD who has done a lot of work in the field of fasting and fasting mimicking protocols as adjuncts to chemotherapy and cancer treatment. And so, anyway, I really went hard on that. I didn't know what the heck I was doing at first and wasn't really doing it right. I did like a straight water fast for that first infusion. It was like 7 days without food, and kind of tapered the protocol after that, to be like, fasting for 48 hours prior to infusions and then 24 hours on the back end. But all that to say, I happen to have friends, practically family, working at the hospital where I got my treatment, and it was conveyed to me that the radiologist that read my follow-up scan after that last cycle of chemo was so impressed with how quickly that tumor shrank that he called over a 30-year tech and was like, "Hey, look at this, man," And so, number one, the grace of God for sure. I think seeing His hand providentially guiding my course and my mind and connections and all that to put me on to that information to to help through treatment, both reduce side effects and increase the efficacy of those chemopharmaceuticals. It is not lost on me how wonderful that was, and so, yeah, super thankful to have come out of that whole ordeal as healthy as I do. There were inevitably some side effects from chemo, developed Raynaud syndrome, and also a little chemo brain. That was the number one reason I didn't want to do it, honestly, because it's a terrifying thing to me to lose your mind. And so I felt like I did lose a step a little. My mental acuity wasn't quite as sharp as it was before, and working in a field where your safety margin is like razor thin, like an MRI, it's not like X-ray or CT. This uses entirely different technology, right? Where, I'm running a 3 Tesla superconductive electromagnet that can pick my truck up 3 times over. And, you got ferromagnetic hardware in your body or in your brain or whatever. And it's just like, you can't screw up, people die in that. It does happen. Others get seriously injured, And so, and then it's naturally a cold environment, right? Working in the MR suite, you have to keep it cool to keep the magnet superconductive. It just tends to be chilled back there, right? And so I was having a heck of a time, man. Just like, my fingers would go, and they still do sometimes. It's improved with acupuncture, but I'd have times in clinic where, my fingers go like Xerox white, and ice cold, And so to maintain manual dexterity required to start an IV on a 85-year-old woman with veins the same size as your catheter, it's a little challenging, and working in the scope of what became, unfortunately, like corporate medicine, classic corporate medicine at a volume and an operational tempo that's just ridiculous. It's like banging out sets of push-ups between patients just to try to get a little circulation going there, And so anyway, ultimately that brings me to today where, there was a link between some toxic exposures that I had in the military and that particular type of cancer, right? And so found some funding through the VA to go back to school and retrain into another field. So taking full advantage of that. Here pretty soon I'll be continuing my education in another field and kind of choosing a different path. But I think, the real kicker honestly has been, there are some basically financial repercussions from all that. And it's given me the freedom to go and pursue whatever it is that I feel God wants me to do, and so that has been the greatest gift, So, when Simon connected us initially, just the name of your podcast, My Valley, His Victory, man, what an absolutely perfect place to share my testimony, When things get really dark and the world comes kind of screeching to a halt, this whole thing has been just a fantastic reminder and a lesson to just trust that He's got you,
Just thank you so much for sharing all of that. Before I share anything, just want to say thank you. I cannot relate on any level to your story and what having cancer is like. But I just think of you said that you were being lined up, you had the perfect job, you had, you were making X amount of money, like everything was just lining up, and it was lining up to save your life. It's the way that I see it.
Exactly.
And it, even though it looked really good in a worldly way, maybe that is what made you say yes, I don't know. But it was really what God was using to save your life. And I'm just so incredibly shocked by your story and in the way that, all of this happened in the way that it did. And I just think it, you use the word providence, like there are just so many things that happened in this story that I'm just like, you can't not see God's hand in it, even though, it is such a terrible event, and there was, a lot of heart that came through that. But I just think like what would have happened if you wouldn't have found out, and just the way that you found out, I think is just crazy. Like, you were at work doing your normal job. You showed up a little bit early. You guys were like, hey, we don't do this test very often. Let's practice it. And lo and behold, like, your whole world gets flipped upside down.
Yeah, and if I can interject, Kenzie, I just before I forget this detail, I think this is important too, just to like emphasize the degree of providence there, So initially we just ran like a scout study, right? And so an MR, it's like a low resolution series of images. And it's obvious enough when you know what you're looking for, but doing a scout, it's like all that soft tissue kind of blends in, in the chest cavity. And there's a real tendency to get tunnel vision on, the anatomy of interest for that exam, right? But now, granted, I was new, but when we showed this scan to others, there was like a 10 and 20 year, there were 10 and 20 year techs there that we showed that also didn't see it immediately, right? But the fact that Ed, my mentor, local guy, was sitting in that seat that morning, he was fresh off for a 30-year career at Hawaii Children's, right? And so that gave him the clinical experience and acumen to identify that particular pathology better than just about anyone. Ed's normally looking at kids, right? And so that's right about where your thymus gland is, yeah. And so, your thymus gland is pretty large as a kid, but it shrinks with puberty, yeah. And so Ed already had the clinical eyes to see that, and so it's not just all of those events conspiring, but even to have his eyes and experience and vision sitting in that seat that morning, yeah, man, just crazy thankful. And ultimately, I gotta say, I mean, just like, it's all a matter of perspective, and perspective quite literally changes quite a bit when you're in the valley, if you think about it topographically, right? And when you're going through it versus the other side, the victory, coming out of the valley, running the ridge, up on the mountaintop. And I try my best to have a good perspective throughout the whole ordeal, but, when the dust really settles on something like that, ultimately I can honestly say, I'd like this is not just something I survived. It's one of the very best things that's ever happened. I mean, really, for so many reasons. Not the least of which is just like the effects that it has on the head and the heart and your perspective, cherishing life, and not wasting any days.
Yeah. Wow. I can't imagine someone saying that getting cancer is the best thing that ever happened to them, but that just shows you like what God has done with this season. And I think that's just enough said right there of the way in which God has worked through this. I would love for you to share with us, I know that you said you really didn't want to do chemo, but it is what, shrunk the tumor. Where does this leave you now? Are you considered cancer-free? Did you have to have any part of it removed? Yeah, just kind of give us an update on like what this means now.
Yeah, praise God, cancer-free. And man, sorry. Yeah, right now that means surveillance imaging. At this point, every 3 months, just to keep tabs on things, make sure everything's in order, and in conjunction with, blood work, tumor markers, things like that. So, yeah, looking good. I mean, I had a suspect lymph node there about a year ago, and thankfully nothing became of that. But, I was already pretty health conscious before, right? But I think this really ups the ante, right? When you wrestle with something like this, it becomes, imperative that you do everything you can. I'm not fatalistic in that sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, everyone's got their time, you know what I mean? But I'm going to do my due diligence to make sure I'm as healthy and vivacious as possible, and doing everything I can to mitigate those risk factors for recurrence and everything. So, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mason, I would love for you to share with a listener who's, maybe going through a really scary health diagnosis or something along those lines. Just a word or a piece of encouragement for that person who maybe just can't see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, my word would come from the word. And I think before I even say this verse, I just want to pause and I think as a listener, gotta resist the fatigue from exposure here and really chew on this, because this is one of those verses in the Christian community that we toss around all over the place, and we see it an awful lot. And if you're not careful, it passes through one ear, not the other, But what really came to me through my valley and was galvanized through the other side. It was Jeremiah 29:11. And this is one of those verses where I do really appreciate NIV's translation on this. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." And man, when you dance with death in that way, verse like that takes on a little more gravity, But I would encourage anyone really going through it to sit with that for a bit and just realize that this is like, we're talking about God here, right? We forget sometimes. This is the freaking superintendent of the universe or multiverse or whatever. I don't know. But, he spoke all that we know and see and don't even understand into existence. And this is also your Father, you know what I mean? Who loves you with a love that is like, I don't think I'm capable of loving like that, you know what I mean? Who do you love most in this life? What do you love most in this life? God loves you with a love that like radically eclipses your most cherished thing or person, right? And so that unlimited, all-forsaking love is attached to a completely omnipotent force. And so I think, for me, this whole experience has really gone to just kind of galvanize that trust and understanding that his ways are far above our ways, right? And you may not see it at the time, and that's kind of the point, maybe, But everyone's got a different path, right? But for me personally, the reality that I'm living in this moment, not too far removed from all that, is literally better than I could have possibly imagined. Literally, my dreams and my plans, what I was banking on, everything that I said, man, it'd be sweet if this happened. No, dude, this is so much better. And just crazy thankful for that, And I think, we don't maybe have time to crack into all this right now, but there's just a whole nother set of, we talked about like the physical side effects of treatment and stuff like that. But, something like that can take a real toll, as it did with me, on, relationships, things like that. And there's just so much in play, and cancer's ugly, man, either way you crack it. I'm super blessed to have come about a type that was especially chemosensitive and able to be treated, even though it was inoperable, right? But yeah, ultimately, I would say, just to piggyback on Jeremiah 29:11, I would also say to those really going through it, I read something a while back that said, have so much faith in God's plan for your life that you no longer get upset when things don't go your way, And being on the other side of all this, man. Yeah. So
Yeah.
hang in there.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I like that. I like that quote at the end. That's really helpful. One thing that I always like to ask people who go through something like this, that's, a major health diagnosis or something that can really shake up, like you said, everything around you. What is one way that somebody who maybe is a family member or a friend, like what's a piece of advice for the support system around that? What's, maybe something that was helpful for you that somebody did, or what's the best way to support someone going through something like this?
If you really do have someone in your tribe wrestling with something like this, I mean, people of action may not necessarily want to hear this, but pray for real pray. You know what I'm saying? Like petitioning God. It's interesting in my kind of annual read through, going through the Old Testament right now, and look at like Moses in particular, and he was like literally able to. Now this is the same God we were just talking about, the superintendent of the multiverse or whatever, all powerful, all knowing, all of that, and Moses was able to change his mind on more than one occasion, and there's many accounts of that throughout Scripture. You know what I'm saying? So he's listening and he's sensitive to our needs and our wants, and by the way, knows our needs and our desires far better than we do, But I would say definitely pray and petition, like for real. And, I had all kinds of people from all over just come alongside. That just meant a great deal to me. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget who really showed up. You know what I mean? And so I would say just show up, find a way to show up, pray about it, ask for guidance and direction on how you can best show up for that person, but it could be like little gifts to help with side effects or issues that they may be having through treatment or, whatever. There's so many ways, but however you do it, just do it, take action and show up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I know that sometimes we don't always know what that person needs, and sometimes we don't know how to ask. And so I always like to ask somebody that's gone through something like this from their perspective, how people showed up and what was helpful in that season. So I just thank you so much, Mason, for walking us through this journey and for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it. I know that this is not a super old thing at this point, and so just appreciate the clarity and the I love that you continue to use the word galvanized. I think that's a really good word for some of this stuff, and so I just really appreciate you sharing. I would love for you to share with the listeners just how maybe they can connect with you or find you on the interweb these days if they want to connect with you.
Oh, yeah, sure. For sure. Yeah. So as far as the socials and all that jazz, I'm most active on Instagram under Pass It Through, PASSERTHRU. Also on Facebook for groups in Marketplace, TCOC. Things like that. Little plug for TCOC. Little plug for Simon here. Awesome yes. Community, the Christian Outdoor Collective. I know anyone listening to your show would definitely appreciate a community like that. But yeah, anyone who is either directly dealing with cancer or someone in their tribe or a neighbor is, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I think. We're seeing a major cultural shift right now, which is really exciting to me, specifically in the realm of healthcare and total wellness, and there's all kinds of alternatives and adjuncts out there that could serve you or someone who loves life. And so, if I can be of help in any way to anybody, please reach out to me directly. A great way to connect, too, is come visit in person at Oz Seward, Alaska this summer. I'm going to be guiding up there and helping out, Heather and Matt and Tim, the operation. And I have to make one more plug if I can for this awesome outfit I've been volunteering with called Luke 5 Adventures. Do you know Luke 5, Kinsey? Man, really, really awesome organization. Yeah, so based on that passage in the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus is inside the house, and this guy's buddies want to get him to Jesus, but they can't for the sake of the crowd, And so obviously they bust through the freaking roof and they lower him down on a stretcher, So Luke 5 Adventures is a nonprofit that so we take folks with disabilities out on the trail in these custom made kind of like, it's almost like a rescue litter that we use for SAR in the mountains, but there are these custom built basically military unicycle type things, and it's pretty rad, man. Getting people out there connecting with creation in ways which they otherwise couldn't, And so they've done, there's like 10 locations nationwide. I've been active with the chapter in Tucson, but looking to get going with the guys in Flag here soon. But yeah, they've done trips to Grand Canyon, bottom of the Grand Canyon in the back, and just a really cool outfit. So yeah, all right, that's my last plug.
Hey, that's okay. The listeners should be familiar with TCSC. They also should be, if they've been a long-time listener, familiar with Heather. She was like, I think episode number 2. Her and her husband have a lodge up in Alaska, and Mason's going to be joining them this summer to go help out. And so I think that's really cool. And I appreciate you sharing the Luke 5 because I've never heard of that. And I didn't even know that something like that it even existed for people with disabilities. And so love seeing ministries out there doing some amazing things like that. So thank you again so much, Mason, for being here and for sharing your story with us.
No doubt. Thanks, Kinsey.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.